Hey guys! In the last devlog, I asked if you guys wanted to know more about the financial stuff for the game. I kinda figured you wanted to know, but I thought I'd ask first just to gauge interest. It turns out you really wanted to know. I could jump straight into the numbers, but I think when it comes to any business, context is very important. So let's first take a brief moment to sum up the development of the game, and then we'll touch on our marketing efforts, our reach, and then our launch day audience. As some of you may remember, I started the game in October of 2017 as a hobby project. I was fresh out of college for game art, and I had a history of making games solo and as a part of a small team in 2D. I'd done that for several years, so I had plenty of experience with basic game logic, a 3D art pipeline, and of course, feature creep. I think this is important to keep in mind. I'd been making games for nearly 10 years at the time, and spent nearly $55,000 on an art degree. That's a lot of time and money invested in something I loved, but I'd yet to show any profit from. A good businessman probably would have told me I was insane, and I probably was to some extent. I worked on the game live on Twitch nearly 5 days a week at the time. Over the course of 3 years and multiple restarts, I managed to build a small audience through Twitch and eventually brought Moz on to remake the game for the final time in multiplayer. The game has been scrapped and restarted about 4 times now since I began development. Moz joined the team as a contractor under a revenue share agreement. I'm not going to go into any numbers here for obvious reasons, but I think that's important to keep in mind. Soon after Moz joined, I ran a Kickstarter campaign, which I'll dive into a bit more when we get to the numbers. After the Kickstarter, we brought on a level designer, Wendy, also for revenue share, and around this time, or maybe a bit before, Kitsune, our 2D illustrator, started working more frequently. I hired Arrow for our video editing work, and my wife quit her job at that time and started working full-time as our community manager, and basically the CFO of Kindred Games, unofficially. The game finally launched into early access on Steam on September 8th, 2020. A few months before launch, we did a marketing push and hired a marketing firm to handle all the PR stuff, including key distribution and outreach for marketing purposes. Shortly after launch, we hired Joe, our animator and AI programmer, as a contractor. And that about sums it all up. Sorry for the recap, I just feel like that's really important to understand the history of the project and how many people are involved, and to have a full understanding of what the game project is. So for anyone new here, let's just give a brief rundown, it'll be quick I swear, of what Swords of Magic actually is. So Swords of Magic and Stuff is a pretty ambitious open-world cooperative RPG with a heavy focus on casual gameplay and discovery. It has a few big features like online multiplayer in a shared world with up to 16 players. The game is made in a stylized low-poly art style, which is relatively quick and streamlined for me to produce. We use very few textures, mostly in the characters and monsters. This keeps the art pipeline simple and efficient. The game's biggest time sink was probably the back-end work, building all the required systems in a very system-heavy game. Every system intertwines with the others to create a cohesive, immersive experience. Many of these systems were not ready for launch, however, so the game launched in a pretty unfinished state. Only one major zone is currently available in the game out of the 8 planned zones, and several features and all storyline content is still missing. I know I'm not putting the game in a good light exactly, but we do update pretty frequently, and we're pretty transparent about the production and the issues we're addressing. And that about sums it up. Now on to what you've actually been waiting for, the numbers. So let's start with audience size. Since streaming on Twitch, I kept a consistent 15 to 30 viewers for quite a while. This finally changed and the game began to grow when I began devlogs here on YouTube. Shortly after the first few devlogs began to take off, I grew to 40 to 50 consistent viewers on Twitch, and my numbers on YouTube reached to about 15 to 30,000 views in the first month after launching a video. These are just rough numbers, and you can see for yourself if you want to look through my past devlogs that they're actually done pretty well. We first started tracking our audience size in March 2020, just before the Kickstarter launch. Our numbers were sitting at the following. YouTube had 21,000 subscribers and 630,000 views. Discord had 3,500 members. Twitch had 6,400 followers. Twitter had 1,600 followers. Our Twitter game hasn't really been the best. Our Steam wishlist before Kickstarter were sitting at 6,800. Kickstarter followers just before it went live were 891. My goal was 2,000, and I assumed that 30%-ish of those followers would actually back, and that could be enough to have a successful campaign. The Kickstarter was profoundly successful though. We were featured on the homepage of Kickstarter for 24 hours, we were featured in an email newsletter, and at this time we did a big marketing push through YouTube featurettes for the game and a devlog, and finally we ran a Gleam.io giveaway for some Steam keys, which pulled a good chunk of traffic in. We pushed that giveaway through Twitch, YouTube, and Discord mostly. Lastly, we ran YouTube ads for the game's trailer and brought in quite a few views and translated into a good chunk of wishlists and backers. For the Kickstarter, we asked for $21,950. That's what we figured it would cost to develop the rest of the game, but we actually raised $79,256 with 2,208 backers. But with PayPal backers, we actually broke $80,000. This number is just completely insane, but let's keep a few things in mind. Taxes, fees, canceled or declined pledges, and revenue shares. Obviously, we pay taxes on this money. Kickstarter takes a cut of 8 to 10%. Some backers pull out after the campaign ends, or their charges just get declined. And finally, Maz and I were in a revenue share agreement based on the game sales, so he also earned a share of this money since our rewards mostly featured game keys. But that still left Kindred Games with enough money to fund the rest of development, plus bring on Wendy, Joe, and our musician. We didn't track all of our social stats right after Kickstarter, unfortunately, but we did track Steam wishlists, which were now sitting at 9,000. We've all heard the nightmares of Kickstarter campaigns. I think Thomas Brush said something about how he'd rather stand naked in front of thousands of people before he'd run another Kickstarter campaign. And I can't blame him. The Kickstarter thing was probably the most stressful part of the game's development for sure. But I will definitely be kickstarting future projects if Swords of Magic and stuff doesn't bring in enough funding for them. The next campaign will be much easier, and with everything I learned, I'm confident that we can trim some of the fat that didn't really affect the end result. If you guys want to learn more about how to run a successful Kickstarter, let me know in the comments, and maybe we can think about making an entire video about it. And while you're there, please don't forget to like and subscribe so the algorithm knows you like my content. Unless you don't like my content, and then, I guess, dislike and subscribe, so you're notified when I make another dumb video and you can come make fun of it. Okay, now let's talk launch day. But before we get into actual launch day numbers, let's talk about our marketing campaign a bit. We did mostly the same marketing for launch that we did for Kickstarter, except the entire team was extremely stressed, so we neglected a few vital places. And looking back, I'm kind of glad we did due to the state of the game. We completely failed to notify YouTube of the launch, and we didn't run any sort of giveaways. We did run YouTube ads again though, and we were featured on the popular upcoming games list on Steam for 3 days before launch, and most importantly, we hired a marketing firm. Now, I'm not going to drag anyone through the mud here or give any real details, but I will say this: Kindred Games will never work with a marketing firm again. One day when we have a better grasp on marketing, I'll make a full video on that as well. But for now, if you're getting ready to launch a game and you're considering going with a marketing or PR firm, I highly recommend you just don't do it. And if you're going to anyway, then at least do your due diligence and make sure there are plenty of games you've heard of in their portfolio. Anyway, based on our restricted research, we're pretty sure that the two main contributing factors to our wishlist gain just before launch were YouTube ads and Steam's feature. I know some videos on YouTube would have gone a long way as well, but hindsight is 2020. So our final social media numbers the day before launch were 20,300 Steam wishlists. YouTube had 28.8 thousand subscribers. YouTube views were at 1.1 million. Discord was 5,600 members, and Twitch had 8,900 followers. And lastly, we had 2,430 followers on Twitter, so we were getting better there. And now the time you've been waiting for. What do all these numbers actually convert to? So let's break down our sales from launch to the end of the first month. So, day 1 units sold, 1,821, coming out to $34,363 gross. 1 month units sold was 6,877, coming out to $130,399. Now let's keep in mind that that number is kind of a lie. Taxes, of course, returns, chargebacks, and any fraudulent purchases came out after that as well. And for our Rocky launch, we had the typical early access refund rate of about 15%, or 1,081 units, which is $21,000 if they're all purchased in USD, which they weren't. Steam will set up prices for you based on other games priced like yours in other countries. So in one country, our game is selling for the equivalent of $8, where it's selling for $20 here in the United States. Next is Steam's cut. They take 30%. Plain and simple. You're paying Steam to host your game, run your page, handle sales events, and promote your game. You're even given several marketing opportunities through Steam where they showcase your game. Steam's cut is a lot, but in the long run, I don't think we would have made even close to 30% of that amount if we tried selling the game through our own website. Not to mention Steam's multiplayer support saved us a fortune. So the net sales after all those cuts is actually $71,855 for month 1 sales. Now before we go into breaking down conversion rates and stuff, let's talk about what an average month of sales is currently looking like. November was a slower month for us. No major updates, no Steam sales, and it wasn't a launch month. In November, we were still reaping the benefits of the launch sale, I think, but we were earned a total of $24,750. Okay, now let's step back and clear the air a bit. Please try to remember that I personally have a small family of 3 I have to take care of. Mine and my wife's student loans and a mortgage. We also have 5 other developers we're paying, if you include our illustrator and musician, plus software and hardware costs. Luckily, we're a fully digital studio, so we don't have to really worry about paying for an office space, and while it'd be nice someday, I don't even want to think about those sorts of expenses. I know it's really easy to look at those numbers and think, dang, it must be nice, but imagine working any job for 3 years without any pay and then finally getting paid basically what you should make in 1 year, all at once. It's nice at first, but you realize you still have a long way to go before you make up for all that lost time, and all the money you've invested. Not to mention that it took me 11 years of trial and error to get to the point where I could even make a game of this quality. So what's the takeaway here really? You're probably not really here to see how great my game did, you're probably here to see how much you could expect from your own game. And while every game is wildly different, with enough data shared between devs, I do think that we can start to see a bigger picture here. So let's talk about the conversion rate we saw. I'd love to just add up all of our followers from different social media and say, well, that's our total fans, but it doesn't exactly work that way, since many of our fans overlap. I also don't pretend to be an expert at marketing or sales analysis, but I can say that we launched the game with 20,300 wishlists, and that converted into 1,800 sales. That's an 11% conversion rate. You'd probably expect a much lower number though if you didn't announce your launch on other platforms. Relying on Steam alone to tell all of those players about your game just isn't a good plan. I remember hearing numbers anywhere from 5 to 30% when doing research on what to expect from wishlist conversions, and so 11% seems pretty good to me. But I think some major factors go into this. Most importantly is the game's early access tag. I think a lot of players still have a stigma around early access games, and I don't blame them. It's all too often a game launches into early access completely unplayable, and then gets abandoned 2 months later. I think a lot of players are waiting around for Swords and Magic to actually be what it's been promised. We didn't launch the game at its best and are far from it being what we envisioned. So I'm hopeful that the wishlist will start to even out over time. What's remarkable to me though is at the end of the month after launch, we had nearly 35,000 wishlists. That means that while we earned nearly 6,900 sales, we also gained nearly 15,000 wishlists. And that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people who saw the game and thought they should keep an eye on it. Maybe they're waiting for a big sale, maybe they're waiting for more content, maybe they're waiting for the economy to stabilize, who knows. But it's nice to see that the game seems to have a lot more potential to keep selling if we keep working. It's definitely some reassurance that we're on the right track and we can keep working on bringing this world to life without having to worry about filing for bankruptcy in the near future. So if you want to chat more with me about any of this behind the scenes dev stuff or ask questions about the marketing or launch process, please check out my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/kindredgames, twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays at 9 a.m. PST. We get way off topic on this kind of stuff on stream. Plus, I do a lot of work on the game, so feel free to stop in and leave some feedback. Thank you all so much for your support and watch time, and all my moderators and the development team for making all this stuff a reality. I'm living my dream as an indie dev, and I hope all this information helps you in some way reach that dream as well. See you next time. Bye.